Hello, Jake. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
So this morning, I thought we would talk a little bit about PSA grading specifically. And I will start by sharing some of my personal experiences. I want to hear the same from Jake, and then potentially get into a conversation around, will PSA always be king for Pokemon? And what does that future look like? So my personal experience is that I'm like a grading newbie, right? It's like I had never had graded cards up until very recently. My first time getting cards graded was through Jake. I just tacked on a few to his bulk order and he did it for me, which was super nice. And I was very pleased with the results in the end. And I just recently set off my own first like personal order to PSA. And basically my impression of the whole process is that it's like extremely difficult for beginners to get it right. Like I've asked Jake for help multiple times. I had to like consult multiple YouTube videos. The fact that like you can't send cards in top loaders, you have to send them in card savers. Otherwise, like they send you the cards back. You have to pack it into like a box. You can't use like a padded envelope. Otherwise, they might send it back. You have to write the class of grading that you're using, like economy or whatever, on the box. Otherwise, they might send it back. You have to put the cards in the correct order of the same as the order form and print out 3 copies of the order form. Maybe one day we'll make a video explaining all this, but like I had to figure all this stuff out with Jake's help and the help of other YouTube videos. And throughout the entire process, I sensed not only is this really difficult for beginners, but there's also just some level of just like contempt for the customer, like coming from PSA. And I assume it's not intentional, but you just see this with like a lot of companies in any domain where they have a little bit of monopoly, right? And they become very comfortable with where they sit, that it's just like, we get to dictate the terms of our service, even to the very customers who are paying us. And instead of sort of welcoming customers with open arms and saying, please submit us your cards, submit as many cards as you can, we'll make the process easy for you, we'll make the process enjoyable for you. I got the sense the whole time that it's like, yeah, you can do it, but like you have to do it exactly right. And like if you do any of these things wrong, like we won't even refund you, right? And you just think for a first-time customer who makes an honest mistake and they're like trying to acquire a lifetime customer from you and your lifetime value and your allegiance, to be very honest and like nice and forgiving about all these things. And that's, maybe that does happen in the end if you do make a mistake, but that's not the impression I got from the way that these messages were given to me through PSA. And so all this sort of led me down a rabbit hole thinking that I wanted to get Jake's thoughts on, which is, has PSA gotten too comfortable at the top, right? Is BGS potentially going to have a resurgence in Pokemon, right? I know BGS, I think, is equally, if not more popular with Magic, and definitely in Star Wars CCG, it's becoming more popular. And then, if in the future that happened, like what would that look like, right? For the vast majority of people who have cards graded for PSA, and even, could there be a new competitor who's entering the field? We know of one where this is potentially happening to try to overtake PSA. So what do you make of all that, Jake?
I think that a number of people feel as you feel and have had frustrating experiences. I think to add to all that, people also get very frustrated. There are 2 other things, negative things that happen with PSA, if not 3. But another negative thing that can happen with PSA is, first of all, they can grade a card like much lower than you think it deserves to be graded, or people have complaints that it isn't fair. Maybe some people get better, like priority grading, who have relationships with PSA. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories that have come out around that over time, particularly in sports cards, not as much in the Pokemon world. And theories about how, and again, particularly in the sports card world, but theories about how like the most expensive cards tend to be the hardest to grade, even though like the rest of the set, like if you look at sports cards, like the Michael Jordan, or like the biggest chase, or for our hobby, like the Charizard, right? The biggest chase card for no identifiable reason is just more difficult to grade. I think that it's so hard to kind of know what's kind of conspiracy, what is people just having like a personal bad experience and then making it, like pushing it out there that like this is happening everywhere, or people just being like not acknowledging their mistakes and that the card actually wasn't that perfect and it should have graded that low and
Right.
You missed something.
And what strikes me as most important for a grading company is consistency, right? Like integrity and consistency is like people will continue to rely on them and trust them if a card that deserves a 5 always gets a 5, and a card that deserves a 10 always gets a 10. And obviously mistakes happen, and like it's not a perfect, it's an art, not a science. But like, if you see these really egregious outliers, then it gets you to start questioning, right, the consistency and the integrity.
Yeah, and a big theory that went around recently was that they're now grading harder overall, like in general, and they're doing that because they don't want the PSA 10 pop reports to get that high, so that the PSA 10 cards that they did grade retain their value, which makes that chase feel so that people continue trying to grade and continue trying to get that 10. So there are all sorts of theories about what they're doing with that. I know people have like connections with people who have worked at PSA, and I've read on forums, all of this stuff is such hearsay, but I, read on forums that people who have worked at PSA have said like good things, that like these things don't happen. They're very like, they have good policies there. Really, it's more of a matter of they have so much to do and they're so overworked that when something doesn't go right, it's not like an intentional scamming situation. It's a overexhaustion, underpaid. They need more people. They didn't expect the, extreme growth, these sorts of things. And, this will be an interesting period because, they've gotten so many more cards during this period than they've ever had before, to my understanding. To see how they're going to handle that, like what the grade quality is going to be. Are there going to be a lot of like errors on the cases? People get cards where they're given the wrong, the wrong label, like a less expensive label or something like that. And then they're understandably very frustrated because they paid a lot of money and waited a long time for that. So see these sorts of things, but going back to what you said, in terms of just like the treatment of customers and, the way they write stuff on their website and all these sorts of things, like I think they definitely could do a better job of just as kind of you put it so well, of like a lot of the people, it's like their first time ever. These are potentially like repeat business that they're going to get throughout a person's whole collecting life, and why they don't like take that seriously with like, giving people, better kind of step-by-step instruction.
Well, I think like along that line, imagine if PSA had the same sort of like customer friendliness and all that a modern sort of like tech consumer brand had, right? Not saying that it has to be all like sort of like hokey graphics and lines and all that, but it's just like you said, like, some people are putting off like their childhood in a box and sending it off to PSA, right? And like, as soon as you do that, you get an email from PSA being like, thank you for doing that, right? Like, we know it's always feels, risky to send us something valuable. Like, rest assured, right? The insurance will kick in if you need it. Rest assured, like, as soon as we get your package, we will take really good care of it and like send you an email update every single time your cards are one step further in the process. Or if the process is delayed, right? Every week, be like, hey, I know you're waiting. Like, thank you for waiting, right? Like, our process is delayed. Hopefully you can understand it. To take like, honestly, pretty simple best practices in like customer relationship management and marketing from like a modern company, I think would go an incredibly long way. And so all that sort of leads me to think, right, like that in of itself isn't going to like break PSA, right? Like, as long as their integrity and consistency stays, roughly the same, and like most of people's existing cards are PSA graded, like they will remain on top. But what combination of factors, including that customer relationship management, could unseat them? And so I have this theory, right? Not a theory, I guess a business proposal for anyone who's enterprising, right? Like, if you wanted to create a brand new grading company and try to unseat PSA, what would be your biggest barrier to entry? Besides sort of getting people to know about you, your biggest barrier to entry would be most of people's existing Pokemon cards are PSA graded. And not only are most of the cards already PSA graded, people have a vested interest in PSA remaining on top, because if another grading company becomes more popular, eventually your PSA cards are going to be worth less than cards that are graded with a new company. And so you've got like massive group of incumbents, not just your competitors, but customers who don't want you to succeed because it will lower the value of their collections, right? So what could you do? I think what you could do is basically say, we will regrade PSA cards for free, right? Just say, like, we would obviously charge people to grade new ungraded cards, but if you have existing PSA cards or BGS or whatever, send it for free. We'll take it out of the case. We will do our own assessment. We'll put it on a new case with our label. And that is how, over time, you could actually change the population of existing cards to PSA cards. Obviously, you need a massive amount of capital up front to do this, and it would sort of suffer from the same like snowball effect that any like social media company, right, needs to really get rolling, is like enough people to get more people to get more people. But I think honestly that's probably like the main way that it could happen. What do you think of that wonky idea?
Yeah, I think that clearly, you're definitely right. Like the biggest challenge of any new company to succeed is the fact that like collectors don't want them to succeed because it's going to lower the value of their cards. Like if CGC, for example, became more like people started grading a lot more with CGC, and CGC started like becoming the gold standard, someone like me who has, like 10,000, plus PSA cards, would be concerned that it would lower the value of my cards. And so how are they going to appeal, to me and get me to, giving me that free grading or that free crossover or these sorts of ideas, is a possible way. Although I'm not sure how that would look like financially for them to do all of that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I should probably say, right, it's kind of obvious, right? Like we have the best interest in PSA staying successful, like me a little bit, you a lot so, right? This is more just hypothetical. But I think like one of the other aspects of it is if people start to like doubt that integrity or consistency, that is the other thing that could do them in, right? So it doesn't even have to be a competitor, it doesn't even have to be customers like frustrated by the consumer experience. It's also that lack of trust. And so honestly, whether or not those conspiracy theories are like true, just the fact that they exist or that they like have some like amount of steam behind them is enough to be, potentially a source of problems for PSA.
Yeah, I think what kind of rubs me the wrong way in general is just like deceit and manipulation coming from anyone involved in that. So it's like, is there deceit and manipulation on PSA's part? Is there deceit and manipulation on a new grading card company throwing salt on PSA? Are people who are actually coming out about these stories, these negative PSA stories, do they have an incentive one way or the other? Are they telling the truth? Are they giving their honest experience with PSA, or are they, working for CGC or Beckett or one of these other companies? And I just think the reality is it's such a competitive space and it's such an unregulated space, and social media creates so many potential like manipulative potential for people to do kind of gross things, that just as you're sort of like collector who, yes, wants PSA, like ideally I want PSA to be like a good company to do their job well, to retain their value, so my collection retains their value, it retains its value. But like on just like a human level, it's like I don't want to put anything like deceitful out there, and I think that a lot of people feel that way. And so it creates this uncomfortable space where I think other people are trying to manipulate collectors, and manipulate our feelings and emotions, and are not telling us exactly what they think, and giving us the best information. And so my hope is that certainly like our channel and videos like this, and I will do more research and put out more full videos on this, I think, like, because I feel like I don't know enough. It's hard on this because it's like I don't want to just like further speculative talking points that aren't true one way or another. But I can tell you, like, my instinct on this is there's a lot of like BS. And a lot of times when people say like really strong things like PSA is amazing or PSA is terrible, it's sort of like it feels like it's coming from like either they've been personally spited or they have like a personal invested interest in the company and the people there.
Yeah.
And so this topic deserves a much fuller, like more complete discussion.
Yeah, let's like do that research, but and yeah. For now, like I think it's about like keying up this question, right, and like the reason why this question matters. And so I've sort of two last points, and then we can, I guess, wrap it up. But one of them is it's just really interesting from like a business model perspective that a really big stakeholder in PSA, not like a part owner of the company, but someone who's a vested interest in PSA doing well, is people like you and me, just like have a bunch of cards that have already been graded by PSA. We want PSA to be good and successful and do really well, and sure, make a lot of profit too, because that means that they will continue to grow and get more people into the hobby, which will make us happy because we have more people, and also drive up the value of our existing collections. But what's interesting is that we don't have like a monetary stake in the company, right? So you think of like a typical business model of like, the people who own the company, the shareholders, they can theoretically exert pressure on the company. And there's also customers, right? And theoretically, if the company does wrong by customers, customers will stop using that company's services, the stock price will go down, and thus they will have also done wrong by the shareholders. So shareholders and customers are like very closely tied together in that like serving one serves the other and vice versa. In the case of this, we have all these like legacy customers who still want PSA to be successful, but won't necessarily keep using PSA. We don't have like new cards to grade. It introduces this whole other variable that I think is like really fascinating from a business perspective, and just makes me wonder about what are all the implications of it. Even the implication of saying something like, what if we created some kind of push for collectors to become like shareholders in PSA and like buy PSA stock, right? And then like we could have some kind of like influence over, just trying to like use our perspective to make the company better. So that's my first thought. And then my second thought that I'll end with is just ultimately, I think PSA being successful and treating people better and all of that is good for the hobby in general, because this experience that I had, I think for a lot of people would drive people away from grading and would prevent the like newbies from becoming experienced graders. And what that means is that like it always felt this other class of like collector or flipper or investor, people who were able to do PSA grading. Like I felt like I was like being left behind from that, which is why I wanted to figure out how to do it for myself, right? So I'm not left behind. I can take advantage of the same opportunities other people have. But like most people who don't have the time or as much like willpower or like motivation to learn and figure it out are going to get left behind because it's so complicated. And they'll just say like, hey, I can't figure this out, right? Like other people, you grade your, my cards for me, and then those people take a margin, or like, I'm just going to sell my card ungraded, right? Or, whatever it is, it creates these two like classes of people within the hobby, like people who figured this out and people who haven't. Obviously, there are much more classes than that in all different kinds of dimensions. But in this case, I think it can be very problematic. And we can imagine an ideal world where the opposite is true, where it's like PSA not only continues to do a great job with grading, but also welcomes people in. And it's like every Pokemon collector is like excited to get their cards graded. They know how to do it. Like more people are grading more cards in general, and that's better for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that those are all those thoughts make a lot of sense. I think that it would be good if PSA, like there's so much more that PSA could grade, that PSA could do. When we think about like booster boxes, like there's so many other parts of the market too that PSA hasn't graded yet or started getting into, and there's so many error cards. Like there's so much more they could do. So, another thing is like, why aren't they catering to all of that yet? And I imagine that there's a lot going on inside of the company in terms of like what is affordable, like how expensive is that process? How much are people really going to pay? How do we hire people? All that stuff, to help create a fuller experience where they don't get taken over by CGC, who is grading errors, for example, and grading like other languages, like a lot more languages outside. Like PSA just grades, base set in other languages, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll do more research on PSA specifically. You can talk about it more. We'll also maybe at some point do a video on like how to grade for beginners. But I'd say in the meantime, if people have questions about like how to grade, I'm happy to help. You're happy to help. So until that video comes out, reach out to us. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.